Hello everybody, welcome back. In this video we're going to continue coding our splash page, and we're going to be adding the functions which are going to be responsible for actually initializing some of the stuff that needs to be done inside of our splash page. So with that said, let's get into it and let's see what we have to do. So the first thing that I'm going to do is that inside of our splash page, I'm going to go and kind of work with the actual init state method that we have and kind of add a bit more stuff to it. So if I go to our splash page state class, you're going to see that inside of there, we have for now just one line that calls the superclasses init state function. What I'd like to do after the superclasses init state function is called, and that's the first thing that you should do inside of an init state function, is that you should call the superclasses init state function first. And once all of that is done, you can have your logic kind of do its stuff inside of that. So what I'd like to do is that I'd like to call a function which I'll call setup, which isn't defined yet. And then what I'd like to do is that I'd like to go down and I'd like to define my function. So since this initialization stuff is not going to be done in it's going to be stuff that's going to take some time. This is going to be a function that's going to return a future. And what future is it going to return? Well, it's going to just be a future of type void. So that just means that this function is going to be a synchronous function. And once it's completed, it's going to return nothing. I'll call this function underscore setup just because I want this function or this method to be private, and then I'll mark this function as an asynchronous function. Inside of here, the first thing I'd like to do is that I'd like Flutter to ensure that all of the widgets have been initialized before we begin our process. So I'll call widget Flutter binding, and then from there I'm going to call ensure initialized. And then after that, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to say await, and I'm going to say Firebase dot initialize app, but I haven't imported Firebase yet. So what I'm going to do is, instead of having autocomplete imported for me by myself, I'm going to go to the top. I'm going to add an import statement for packages, and I'm going to do import, and then I'll do Firebase core. So Firebase underscore core, and import that package, and then go down, and now I can do Firebase dot initialize application, and I do not have to send anything to this function. It's going to find the appropriate files that it needs by itself. And once we have this time, the next thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to call the function register services, and that's not defined as well. So I'm going to go down and I'm going to define another function, and this function is going to not return anything as well. I'll call this register services, and then open this function up, and that's pretty much it. Do command save. And now that I have this, I'm going to go back to the top of where we had our setup function being called, and I'm going to say once the setup function is done, I want to call another function, and I am not concerned with the values. Instead of taking it in, I'm just going to place in an underscore, which is just going to disregard it. And I'm going to say that I am going to call the onInitialization complete function. But how do we access it, since it's in the corresponding splash page class and not in the state or the splash page state class? Well, there is a property that we can access widget, which allows us to access this class, the splash page class, or the class that's attached to the state. And then inside of there, we have access to the actual onInitialization complete function. I'm going to call that, and then I'm going to add the brackets at the end to signify that it needs to be invoked. And then I'm going to add a comma at the end, and then I am going to add another comma, or a semicolon in this case, and then do Alt-Shift-F command save. So with this, we are pretty much calling the onInitialization complete function after our actual setup is done. So for now, our setup is just initializing our Firebase app. So I'm just going to reload the application, make sure that we do not get any errors. And as you can see, we're not getting any errors. The next thing that I'm going to do is that I am going to actually go to console.firebase.com and actually go to the Chatify Udemy application, and just make sure that it kind of gives us some analytics according to users. And as you can see, now you can see that it tells us that at some day there were 2 users that accessed our application. So we know that the Firebase connection is kind of working, and you will have to wait some time for this data to be aggregated by Firebase and displayed. But if you see this kind of data, then you know that there is something that's kind of accessing your Firebase project. And since we only implemented the stuff in Flutter, we definitely know that now the Flutter and Firebase connection is working. So now that we have this done, I'm going to end this video here, and I'm going to see you guys in the next video, where we'll create our first service inside of our application. That is going to be our navigation service, which is going to allow us to have capabilities of navigating between different pages of our application. So with that, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.